Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bulwark YouTube channel. I'm here with Bill Kristol and Andrew Egger, and the big week for Democrats and for Kamala Harris has finally come to an end. Last night, Vice President Harris took the stage to accept the nomination. Bill, let's start with you. What did you think of it?
It was an impressive speech and the conclusion of an impressive convention, which is the conclusion actually of an impressive, 4.5 weeks? I guess it's hard to believe it's only that since Joe Biden got out. It's almost exactly a month, I guess, right? July 21st is when Biden got out. Harris had the nomination clinched a couple of days later, July 23rd, let's say. And I think today is August 23rd. So that's a month, I believe. And kind of an amazing, pretty impressive month, really. I mean, a couple of tiny things I would have done differently, I suppose. But on the whole, one of the more impressive performances we've seen by a candidate and her team in modern American politics, I think. In terms of the speech, just briefly, I mean, most people saw it or have read it probably now. I encourage people to read it, though. It's a more subtle speech than people might appreciate. You hear it, it sounds kind of straightforward. That's her manner of presentation. Let's get to business here. But especially the biographical part of it, she definitely introduces herself, I think, to the American public who don't know her that well still. Tells the story of growing up with her parents, especially focusing on her mother. And I thought that was nicely done. There are many ways to tell your own story. It's hard to do it actually without seeming self-promoting or kind of narcissistic or grandiose kind of or whatever. And she did it, a lot of it through the lens of her mother and the relationship with her mother, which I think made it relatable, as they say. She tied it into other families' experiences. Really, that first 10 minutes I thought was as I say, it sounded natural when she said it, and it was natural, and she believes it and all that. But it was a deftly crafted, I think, introduction to herself. And the rest of it was patriotic, mainstream, well, almost entirely, I'd say. Fair amount of Bill Clinton kind of domestic policy, little Jack Kemp sprinkled in, opportunity, a lot of John McCain sounding foreign policy, honestly. And not much there for the left. I mean, that's what's striking. If you think of the Democratic Party of the last decade, but also especially the caricatures of it, or let's say the elements of it, the faculty lounge elements of the Democratic Party, race, gender, almost none of that. I think race and gender are mentioned once in the context of Harris saying, I think she describes this to her mother, if I recall correctly, that, you need to not worry about race and gender and just do your best or something like that. I mean, it was not a pro-identity politics point. It was an anti-identity politics point. She mentions America and Americans something like 30 times in the 35-minute speech. Opportunity, freedom feature a lot. Country, nation feature a lot. She never mentions the Democratic Party. That one paragraph, if you want to go look at it, I think it's worth looking at, which really shows what she's up to, is when she accepts the nomination formally. This always happens in these convention, speeches. I'm proud to accept the nomination of the Democratic Party, and she has a nice wind up to it where she says, I've always worked on behalf of the American people. She's made the point that when she went to court, she argued on behalf of the people, on behalf of Americans of all sorts who work hard. She never says the word Democratic. I mean, I'm proud to accept your nomination. And I don't think she's terrified of the word Democratic or anything like that. It's a Democratic convention, of course, but it's very striking how much she wants to be not, she got a better way to say it. This is not about party, this is about country. It's striking how much she wants it to be a kind of country-first message, not a highly partisan message, not a left-wing identity politics message. Final point on that. I mean, I was just thinking about this. I didn't put this in morning shots, but, she's going to be if she wins, she'll be the first woman to be president of the United States. Not a little thing. She really doesn't mention that. I mean, she alludes to it in a sort of subtle way when she's discussing her mom and her mom's encouraging her to have high aspirations. So this kind of an element, I think maybe almost more implicit than explicit of, being the first woman president is a high aspiration kind of thing. But it's not really gender specific in the way she presents it. She never says glass ceiling. She doesn't look at Hillary Clinton's speech from Monday night. That's a much more conventional Democratic, we should be proud to be the party that's breaking through this horrible glass ceiling that's oppressed women. Very little of that, much more on the positive opportunity side, much more of a tribute to America as the country that's made this possible. So I think centrist, patriotic, and successful, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of our never Trumpers here at the Bulwark and on our Slack channel were like, hey, this feels like I'm at John McCain's convention in 2008, which is an interesting thing to hear Democrats, I suppose, after the past couple of years shout USA, USA, and talk about the most, comprehensive border bill
Right.
that would ever be passed, and it's really the most conservative border bill that would be passed in a long time. Andrew, what did you think of the speech?
Yeah, I think, we dwelled on the vibes all week long, like the kind of how through the roof Democratic enthusiasm was and all of that. And that's what you expect out of a convention. But I really do think as we get a little further away from this thing, some of the stuff Bill's talking about is kind of the core, not only of Harris's speech, but of the entire convention's programming, right? I mean, the whole narrative that you get from Donald Trump and the right these days is that the Democratic Party is an institution that is completely in thrall to its most radical elements, to basically the cater of Marxist university professors and radical campus protesters and identity politics mavens and all of these things. And it wasn't just Harris. I mean, like the whole convention was pitched as Big Tent America, Big Tent America. Donald Trump is the small, and his MAGA movement is the small, insular group that you really have to tick a ton of boxes to belong to. And Kamala Harris's Democratic Party is not that way at all. I mean, at least that's the way they're pitching it. And I think this is a thing that it dates back a few years. It kind of dates back really to Biden winning the nomination in 2020, and the way that Donald Trump tried to hang all of that leftist radicalism around his neck when they debated. He said, they're not going to let you be a moderate, Joe. They're gonna push you around. They're gonna pull you around. And he said, look, I am the Democratic Party. They're in the Democratic Party, but I'm the Democratic Party right now. I won the nomination. Bernie Sanders didn't win the nomination. It was me. And he took that message forward, and he kept that whole coalition together. The progressives were up on stage. Bernie Sanders spoke. AOC spoke. They were not agitated. They were not unhappy with Kamala Harris's nomination. Bernie Sanders was got behind her very quickly. But at the same time, it was very much this big tent, this thing that deliberately spoke. I mean, I think there was more programming aimed at sort of disaffected moderates and former Republicans than there was aimed at sort of like the red meat progressives in a lot of ways. And I think one thing that it really brought home to me was that this sort of like marriage of convenience that felt extremely temporary between, folks like us and I really just Joe Biden specifically in 2020, where it was kind of like, hey, this guy won the nomination. We can make this temporary truce to keep Donald Trump out. I think that what you saw this week was kind of the Democratic Party's pitch for let's not have that be like an instantaneous thing. It's still a short-term thing, because right now it still is very much a marriage of convenience in one respect, where it's all about beating Donald Trump. There's a ton of, we're in the tent. The progressives are in the tent under Kamala Harris. A lot of never Trumpers are in the tent under Kamala Harris. And now the question is, can you maintain that if she wins and if she goes into office and actually needs to govern? Will there be some way to forge a governing agenda that keeps all of these pieces together? And that's the work that hasn't been done yet. And maybe that can't be done. Maybe if she becomes president, it quickly becomes clear that there is no new democratic fusionism that can keep all of these ideological pieces of the coalition playing together. That said, Democratic politics right now is a coalition building project in a way in which Republican politics just isn't. Republican politics is still all about kind of who's wearing the jersey, and specifically all about the person of Donald Trump right now. And we see that play out in a bunch of different ways. So I will be very interested to see, this convention programming has made me very interested to see whether there's a more medium-term alliance to be made here than I might have expected, even after Donald Trump leaves the stage.
If I could just add one point on that, I think that's very well said. And I mean, I think domestic policy is always it's always coalition. It's always, interest groups who are making trade-offs, and policies are never pure. It's free trade, except we make some exceptions, or Reagan did, and Biden has, and everyone else has for different groups. And same with a billion tax cuts, spending, I think on foreign policy, I would say it's a little bit beyond a marriage of convenience. I mean, there was nothing that Harris said in terms of national security, Ukraine, and so forth, that wasn't pretty consistent with a kind of McCain, Bush, Romney Republicanism. Maybe she won't be quite as tough on Iran as some hawks want, though she actually went out of her way to make clear that she would not let America be pushed around by Iran. It does bracket some bigger questions down the road, I suppose. But the degree on foreign policy to which Trump is now in MAGA world and mainstream and the Democratic Party, and I would say not just never Trump Republicans, but a lot of mainstream Republicans, actually, the half of the Republicans on the Hill who voted for Ukraine aid are in a different world and a much more traditional American foreign policy world. That I think is interesting going forward. I agree the domestic policy stuff, there's more obvious pulling and pushing, and maybe that's always the way it is. But I was struck by that. And just in terms of the convention, you mentioned Sanders and AOC got a nice role and Sanders. But really the last night, which is the key night, the degree to which, Adam Kinzinger was more prominent in this convention than 95% of the Democrats who spoke. And the Democrats who spoke in the last night, incidentally, were pretty moderate, especially in the last hour and a half, right? So, and tough on it. Leon Panetta, but certainly a Democrat, Clinton's chief of staff, Secretary of Defense under Obama. But nonetheless, quoting Ronald Reagan and a very classic pitch for American global leadership. And then Adam Kinzinger, a Republican member of Congress, speaking as a Republican, got a fair amount of time and really was well received, it seemed, and gave a good speech, I thought. So anyway, I think especially on the foreign policy side, which they chose, I wondered how much they neglected it so much in the first 2 nights. Andrew and I think talked about this earlier in the week, was there going to be any national security and foreign policy? But they which must mean they think it's a strength. That's not just something they threw away. They brought it up pretty in the last couple of hours, pretty centrally, and it was a pretty big part of the policy side of her speech.
Yeah, I want to touch on 2 points there before we move over into Trump's reaction to all of this, which I'm sure is classy as always. But, this speech, we've been talking about, it was very much geared towards the center, a lot of policies or a lot of just even verbiage or ways of approaching an issue seem to be from a version of the Republican playbook. Bill, do you think that this has a chance to win over some Republicans who don't like Trump but couldn't see themselves voting for Kamala Harris?
I think so, or at least more independents and people who are wavering, some Trump-Biden voters who might have been going away from Biden because of age, presumably, and somewhat because of things the Biden administration did, maybe coming back to now to Harris. I don't know how many new ones. It's so polarized. And people can always find things, God knows, in Harris's own record and from back to 2019 in the primary and elements of the Democratic Party to excuse. And I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but just to justify not voting for Harris. So I don't know what percentage, but again, if it's 2 or 3%, that's a huge deal. And I do think she may well have laid the groundwork for that.
She also, which I don't know if it was justified for me to be surprised, but she really did, maybe not from a specific policy standpoint, but she did address Israel. She did address Palestine. She was very clear that Israel deserves the right to defend itself. But she also went and said that the death in Gaza has been devastating. She very much tried to walk that line with not too much. It seems like there was applause for both sides of that issue. Andrew, what did you make of that? Did she do what she needed to do there or start there?
Yeah, I think she straddled that line as well as she could have, as well as anybody really could have. I do think, when I talk about a minute ago about this project of finding some new consensus among all of these coalitions, I don't think we should undersell that this is maybe the single stickiest part of that, because there are a lot of progressives, quite pro-Palestine, anti-Israel progressives in the Democratic Party who did not feel like they got the convention the good vibes convention that they were looking for. No Palestinians spoke from the stage. Essentially, the furthest out you got toward their way of thinking was AOC and Bernie calling for ceasefire. Biden has worked very hard over the last year to try to kind of like have a little something for everybody in his policy here, trying to stand up staunchly for Israel while also finding ways to kind of blunt the carnage that's taken place in Gaza. And I just don't know whether there's anything that whether there is a line to walk that keeps both those like staunchly pro-Palestinian progressives happy, as well as, more traditional Democrats and folks like us who are, more historically pro-Israel as a key U.S. ally and all that. So I genuinely don't know if there's a better way to walk that line than Biden really has, and still gotten tons of blowback than Harris did last night and still invited blowback. So we'll see. I mean, we'll see whether there's any kind of triangulation
I think
that's even possible.
It's not simply walking line. Again, I want to slightly object. I mean, it's a policy. I don't disagree with the policy. I'm very pro-Israel. I don't really disagree with anything Harris said last night. It would be irresponsible for a U.S. president or vice president to say everything's great. I'm going to just deplore, which she did extremely strongly October 7th, and be pro-Israel, which was great, and not say a word about tens of thousands of people killed in Gaza. I mean, you've got to say something. It is bad. And they probably could have done a little more not to do it. And we are trying to now bring about the release of the hostages. So I guess I think, and I don't think there's that much. I don't think it's parallel. The pro-Palestinian, if you want to call it that, part of the Democratic Party is what? 20% of the members of Congress? Maximum, I would say. How many governors? I mean, who are the major figures who were on that side? I mean, not really many. And maybe some college, I take the point. There's some young voters and stuff. But I think it's a lopsided. So I would just say, look, every policy is in the Middle East and elsewhere is, straddling the line. Reagan and Bush stopped Israel from going further than as far as Israel wanted in Lebanon and in Gaza in different times. So I guess to be fair, I think it was I understand there's obviously a lot of triangulation going on politically, but I think that both Biden actually in office and Harris and what she said have a defensible policy, a reasonable policy going forward. It's not going to make everyone happy because it's just you can't in that part of the world or in many parts of the world. So I guess, again, I thought that was not just deftly done, but sort of an honest statement of a sort of reasonable U.S. foreign policy that she can sustain. But we'll see. And we'll see how strong the left is. I mean, they were pretty rough. They did not give much to the left, the anti-Israel part of the party. I guess I'd say they gave nothing to the anti-Israel part of the party and not much to the very pro-Palestinian part. And I'll be curious to see if there's any real blowback, honestly. I don't think AOC mentioned it in her remarks the other night, for example.
She called for ceasefire.
She called for a ceasefire. She called for the releasing the hostages.
Yeah, right.
I don't think that there's a person in the Democratic Party that isn't in favor of a ceasefire at this point. Most likely,
the Israeli government is in favor of a ceasefire if it is negotiated properly. There's not a person in the Republican Party who's against the ceasefire. I mean, this is where I think it's been a little exaggerated. There's some very bellicose pro-Israel people, friends of mine, or ex-friends in some cases, who are just looking at every moment any Democrat says something about, get death in Gaza or a ceasefire. Oh my God, they're selling out and stuff. But in fact, this is where the mainstream of Israeli opinion is. They don't want to fight in Gaza forever, and they don't want to kill another 30 or 40,000 people, Palestinians there. So I'm probably overstating a little bit that, there are real differences, I understand. But I think this is not, I would wonder sort of how deep that rift is compared to some others. Ultimately, some of these economic policies could also be obviously sources of tension in a much more obvious way. But again, what happened to the Green New Deal? If you've been watching Fox for the last 3 years, that's the heart of the Democratic Party. Biden barely pulled back from it because of Manchin. They're all deeply invested in it. Incidentally, climate change, which they actually do believe in, and as they should, and have tried to do some things about, that wasn't very prominent either. I mean, the degree to which they were quiet about, I'm not saying they walked away from, and I'm not saying that when they in office that they wouldn't do things that people like us might object to, that they're not pro-market and they go too far and so forth. But the degree to which they managed to discipline themselves, not just Harris, but the party as a whole, not to say things that would give grist, is that the right term, to the mill of Fox News and of the Trump campaign, was pretty striking. And as you pointed out, Sebastian, I mean, probably the most sustained domestic policy, it wasn't a very heavy policy speech, but the most sustained discussion she had of any domestic issue, don't you think, Andrew, maybe I'm wrong about this, was immigration, where she explicitly said, she didn't even talk too much. She wanted legalization, a path to legalization, which is traditional and right. But she didn't really go on a lot honestly, about amnesty and other things. And instead it was this border bill, which, as you said, Sebastian, it was a tough bill that a lot of Democrats had to swallow hard to accept. She just sent it to me and I will sign it as president. That was the one thing, that was probably the most concrete thing she said about domestic, well, I don't know if that's domestic policy, but border policy or immigration policy, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure we could go on a different show. We could do a deep dive into what the Biden administration could have done in those 3 years to not make it such an issue, whether the bill needed or what have you. But what I was just struck by was how Trump killing the bill, if this was Biden, probably wouldn't have meant anything, because we didn't have somebody that could go out there and really deliver that message that Donald Trump killed the most conservative bipartisan border bill that has ever happened. Though, and now she's here.
Yeah, no, that doesn't necessarily, just to be clear, and put a dose of cold water on all this talk. I mean, saying these things doesn't inoculate you from attacks, and nor should it, incidentally. I mean, they're perfectly entitled, the Republicans and Trump, to cite the numbers of people coming across the border and how they said certain things were fixed and they weren't fixed 3 years ago. That stuff's not going away. Crime committed by undocumented immigrants and so forth. I mean, that's not going away because Harris said, 2 or 3 paragraphs last night, and we'll see it. We don't know what the potency of that issue or the issue of crime and other issues will be, but to the degree that just saying stuff can move the needle a bit, she tried.
And can I just say on that, I do think it's been one of the biggest unforced errors of the Biden administration to wait until this year to push this issue, to push their border package, and then to sign the executive orders that he signed to clamp down on some of this stuff, because they have had a really significant impact on border crossings, which they now tout. They're now saying, look, the numbers are way down. Okay, that's great. But doesn't that kind of feed into the point Republicans were making all along during the negotiation of this border package, that Joe Biden did have tools in his toolkit to make a real dent in the issue of just kind of tons and tons and tons and tons of people crossing over the border and overwhelming the Border Patrol down there? I mean, he has now done a lot to address the problem unilaterally. So I think a little bit of that triumphalism. I love the rhetoric. I think it's great that Democrats are paying attention to that now. I think it's long overdue, but I think it's a little bit too long overdue, right? I think they had an opportunity to take that away from Donald Trump and Republicans a lot earlier than this spring. But so I just wanted to say that as well.
Oh, I think I just unlocked a door that you've just been waiting to open there, Andrew. Andrew, you wrote about Trump's response to last night, and obviously, the consensus is it was a pretty good speech from Kamala Harris. How is Donald Trump taking it?
Yeah, we've been writing about this a lot, where it just doesn't seem like they have a response, right? I mean, Donald Trump has very rarely been off balance in his political career. He's been insane. He's been totally reprehensible all the time, but he always has seemed to have his own center of gravity. And just since the switch to Kamala Harris, I mean, the flailing has been really unbelievable. And I think you kind of saw this in microcosm last night, because he had kind of set up and planned to have his little live react. He was going to live tweet the speech. He was like, "Hey, I'm hanging out with my buddies. We're going to put the thing on the TV." He starts out live tweeting, here she comes into the arena, enough of the personal stuff. Let's talk about the border. And then very, very early in the speech, the kind of jocular, let's have fun making fun of Kamala thing just vanished. And it became, he was just yelling at the TV with his thumbs on the internet. I mean, it was crazy. And it seemed in large part because she very early in the speech was tweaking his criminal convictions and, his behavior on January 6th and all of this stuff. And he starts, tweeting, or what do you even say on True Social? I'm just gonna say tweeting. He starts tweeting in all caps, is she talking about me? These prosecutions were all started by her and Biden against her political opponent, me. She's lying again about Project 2025, which she knows, and so do all Democrats, that I have absolutely nothing to do with. And then, just weird stuff. Walz was an assistant coach, not a coach. where's Hunter? And just completely. And then after the speech was over, he called into Fox News and just kind of ranted for 10 minutes. They eventually had to cut him off. He was pushing buttons on the touchpad on his phone with his face. You could hear in the call. And I mean, they literally had to cut him off in mid-sentence to end their program and go to Greg Gutfield. And so he was not done ranting. He then called into Newsmax and did a little more. I mean, Trump has always been kind of an unchained figure, and that has been to his political advantage in a lot of ways. But it just seems like he's totally rudderless right now as he tries to respond to Kamala Harris in a lot of ways. And I just think we have all been we're kind of dispositionally pessimists over here. And like, there's been a lot of data supporting pessimism for basically this whole cycle up until this swap. But I really do feel just in the last few days, like, okay, maybe it's possible to be too careful and too pessimistic about the fact that I really it does seem at this moment as though Kamala Harris is somewhat favored to win in November.
Yeah, the idea of jinxing it is very much living in my heart. Bill, do you have
one little Never Trump organization like
I know. I know. God is just looking to make our lives, a living hell, of course. Bill, do you have any thoughts before we shove off about Trump and his response?
Well, I'm with you on the jinxing, and God is looking to make our lives, that's what they're looking at. We're not too little for God, no sparrow goes unnoticed, and no, never Trump, the Bulwark certainly doesn't go unnoticed, and God knows what he's thinking up there in terms of planning to laugh at us about this, but hopefully not. I agree with Andrew. I mean, he wrote a very excellent thing this morning about, how unhinged Trump seems. I'm always nervous about, I spent many years when Andrew was still in college, in sort of Never Trump world, being on the side, and I think I was right, don't underestimate Trump. I can't tell you how many people remember in 2016, of course he's going to lose. And how could these people foolishly make the idiotic career decision to go work for Trump in the campaign? Oops, and then he wins. Well, how idiotic to go work for him in the White House. They're finished, Then January 6th, he's finished. No. And there they are chugging along. I think he personally is more unhinged, and that's going to hurt him some. Hasn't hurt him a huge amount, on the other hand, yet. So, I agree that Harris is now ahead 3 or 4. Maybe she'll be up 6 after this weekend when the convention effect sinks in the polls. Not ahead 20. So, we're not talking about a meltdown, at least so far as we can tell, in the Trump side. They have hundreds of billions of dollars. They have ads up on crime and immigration. So I remain sort of nervous that he can go through a period of floundering. It's going to hurt him some, I take it. But, they can come back in these month or two. He looked kind of a little off balance at times in August and September of 2016. He came back. I think that debate on September 10th is very important. If he's going to come back, if he's going to continue down the path Andrew described, we'll see more of that presumably in the debate. And I think that really could then, if she goes into it ahead, he flounders and looks crazed, she looks good. That could be basically that could be the moment, I think, where the thing gets kind of resolved, actually. If he can stabilize himself, if they can get him under control, if they can get him back on hammering her on 2 or 3 issues that they do have weaknesses on. It's amazing, that whole speech. You wouldn't have known from the speech, would you? I guess except for 1 or 2 sentences early on that she was Joe Biden's vice president. It was like Biden was barely mentioned. And she was all about the future. We're going to do this, and we have to look forward. And, if Trump, you don't have to be a genius to write some pretty good lines for Trump to remind people of various things the Biden-Harris administration didn't do or did do, and also to remind people of what Harris herself said in 2019 when they were all running to the left. So I think that's the sort of question for the next 2.5 weeks. How much effect is the paid advertising having beneath the surface, even though Trump's, tweeting idiotically? And secondly, how much can they get him focused before September 10th? But yeah, I think she's slightly favored now.
Can I add one quick thing on that point, which is like just to then kind of agree with you and counterbalance the thing I was saying a minute ago. There is kind of a timeline that's just adjacent to the one that we're in, where Trump reacts to all of this stuff, not just by kind of getting unhinged personally and in his attacks on Kamala Harris, but by blowing up his campaign apparatus. There was a lot of chatter a couple weeks ago. I've lost all sense of time, maybe just a week ago, about, nothing seems to be landing. The strategy that they had been operating very successfully is no longer operational. And are Trump's top campaign aides, Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles, are their jobs maybe in danger? Is Trump likely to kick them to the curb out of pique? And I think like if he had done that, that would have very much buttressed my case of kind of like, wow, the wheels maybe actually kind of coming off this thing, because they had been very instrumental in keeping him on message and a little bit disciplined, like to the extent that that's possible to do with Donald Trump, buttoning him up to great effect and to great advantage to him so far in this campaign. But I do think that he very kind of publicly tamped some of that down. He had a vote of confidence in Wiles and LaCivita, and that talk seems to have receded. And I think we're kind of past the moment where it would have made sense for him to kind of do the "you're fired" thing that he has so often done during his administration.
No, he just brought in Corey Lewandowski.
Right. Yeah. In kind of a weird like security blanket. I like that guy kind of role, but he didn't install him atop the campaign. Right. So we should not overestimate the chances of Trump beating himself like has so often been done in the past. He doesn't ultimately ever totally beat himself. You still have to beat him.
Right. Although I'm sure you both can agree that never underestimate Trump to break a couple norms. It would kind of be unthinkable to fire your chief campaign officers at this point in this game, but I don't put anything past the man at this point. All right, last thing very quickly before I let you both go. This is our last morning program for the DNC, obviously, because it's over. But Bill, Andrew, if you could just give me your favorite moment of the week and your least favorite moment of the week really quickly.
This is the kind of thing we should have been thinking about in advance. No, I said this on a show the other night. I think my favorite, it was just a tiny little micro moment, but the little interaction that Tim Walz had with his family and his vice presidential acceptance speech was very heartfelt, very wholesome, very real, with his, the camera cutting to his family and his son kind of jumping up with tears in his eyes and fist pumping for him. And I just thought like just kind of the normalcy of the kind of American family moment of that. It's not the kind of thing you can script. So much of these conventions are just sort of artifice and gloss and pre-canned lines and there's a place for all of that, and it is what it is, but that kind of family moment to me was just, like I said, very heartfelt and very, very kind of right down the middle of what they were trying to say with the convention, which was like, we can be a little better. We're in this sort of mirage, this sort of funhouse mirror political space with the MAGA movement and everything, but like, it is all a mirage. We are just trying to get back to basics with like supporting the middle class and supporting the family and having a more optimistic, brighter vision. And I just thought that was a beautiful little moment on its own terms and for kind of what it said for the party in that moment. That was best.
No, that was good. I'll do the worst.
Okay, we'll come back to you.
I agree with you on the Walz family. That was really lovely. And also I would say the reaction of MAGA world to the 17-year-old son, to Gus Walz, is beyond disgusting. It really shows how these were never great people probably, but how much Trumpism has just really corroded their sense of decency and civility and I don't know, everything. For me, the worst moment was when they dropped James Taylor on Monday night and destroyed the hopes and dreams of tens of millions of boomers who were hoping to see him once again at the convention and be reminded of the songs they listened to in college and high school and college. So that was, and they never brought him back. And then there was the alleged surprise guest Thursday night. Well, do we even know what that was about? I mean, was there one who didn't show up?
There was no surprise guest.
It was always made up. I mean, I don't know. What was that about? That was a weird sidebar of the convention, I would say.
I think Doug Emhoff started it. That's what I'm going for. 2028. That's when he'll play.
Yeah.
They're gonna devote a whole night to him. All right,
wait,
Andrew.
My worst moment, real quick, was also the DJs. I just can't. What is DJing? What's the point of that? What's the point of having, I'm DJ Jazzy Jeff up there, like, hello America, are you having fun, Democrats? Just get that off the stage. I don't need that in my life. It's a horrible way to spend your time.
I take it you don't
yeah.
frequent the club,
Yeah,
Andrew.
I mean,
No, not really my scene. And not really any of their scene either. Like a bunch of 50-year-old delegates kind of trying to half-heartedly bop along. It's just a weird look all around.
Do you like Lil
They're gonna
Jon?
keep doing it,
maybe
but
they're
say
having a
it.
better time. Maybe
You like
they're,
Lil Jon?
maybe they're having more fun than you think, Andrew. There's.
I
These are
did like that.
Democrats, you know?
The moment, no, the like the hype tracks under the convention voting. That was cool. I just the human person of the DJ up there
Human
saying his
person.
own name and stuff.
Gonna
Just-
AI the DJ, basically.
Yeah,
Make it all
exactly.
automated.
Put it on a
All
plate.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, thank you both for joining me this morning. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, whether this is the first video you're watching or if you've watched all of our DNC coverage. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And, we'll be having more of this coverage going forward. And we'll be doing some more live content, I'm sure, for the debate. So that's fast approaching. So thank you and keep tuning in.